Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk today about a subject that really doesn't get enough attention, in my opinion, and that is self-healing object variables. What are they? How do they benefit us? Well, that's what we're going to cover today. Right off the bat, I'm going to direct you to my webpage on the subject. It's a subject that it's hard to find information on. It was something that I was introduced to, I'm not even sure anymore, 10 or 15 years ago, when I was having some performance issues with a specific database that kept having to do various loops. I kept hitting or requesting the current database over and over and over and over. And someone in a forum pointed me to this technique. And it drastically impacted performance. It improved performance considerably just by implementing a very simple aspect, which is the self-healing object variables. We're going to get into it. You're going to see that they're not hard to actually implement. And once you start doing so, it actually even simplifies your code. So you're going to reduce the amount of code you have to write as well. So not only do you benefit on the performance side, but you also even benefit on the coding side. So I'm going to let you guys look at the web page. I'm just going to dive right into code and examples. I think that's what you guys want to see anyway. And yeah, let's get to it. So I created a demo database here. And right off the bat, you're going to see I've organized basically each self-healing object variable into its own module. So that way everything's compartmentalized and nothing's being mixed and matched while you try to learn something new. Obviously, you can combine all this stuff together and make one massive module. But typically, even in my own systems, I always divide things up like this. It just makes it more portable, in my opinion. But I did this for demonstration purposes, especially. And if you go down to the bottom, there's one exception to the case. And I just made this is the standard way of doing things. So I want to show the standard way, and then we're going to see how we can improve upon that. You'll also notice for one of the demos, I needed a table. So that's why we have a table in this demo database. But there isn't even any information in it. But I still needed to be able to reference the table for an example. Okay, so let's start off the most common approach, which is the standard approach module. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with seeing code like this, where you dim your DB or RS, then you set them, you do something with it, and then you close and clear them. Now, in a simple database, it's not the end of the world. But when you get into labor-intensive databases that are used continuously throughout the day, databases that do lots of data processing, so you're doing lots of looping and things like that. Well, every time you're doing this loop, you're hitting up the system and going, give me the current database, and setting it, and then clearing it, and then give me the current database, setting it, and clearing it. And you're doing this over and over and over. And that's unnecessarily taxing on the system. And it takes time to set a variable and call up the current database. And that's where self-healing variables come in. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to, upon the first call, obviously, it still has to do that initial set the database to the current DB. But on all subsequent calls, it keeps that in memory. So it doesn't have to go through that labor-intensive process every single time. It just keeps reusing the value that it already has. So what happens is, if we, let's say we take an example where we got to call this subroutine 10 times, well, traditionally, that means it's going to set itself 10 times. 10 times the workload. But if we go to self-healing, what's going to happen is, the first time it's going to go through that labor-intensive process of setting itself to the current DB, but the other 9 times it will not have to do that. So it's going to, from a performance standpoint, be much better. In certain areas, you'll notice self-healing variables don't have a huge impact, And in other aspects, it can have an extraordinary impact. And when I mean extraordinary, I've taken a database that a client handed me, and I reduced a process by several minutes just by implementing self-healing variables. I didn't even get into optimizing the tables and all the rest of the stuff that needed to get it done. So it can truly have an impact on performance just on its own. So let's start off by looking at the most common property here for us, which is always going to be involved with Microsoft Access, so the current DB. So if we go to the module MS Access, you'll see all my modules are always set up the exact same way. So the top section will be the self-healing variable portion of the code, and then the lower section will always be a subroutine or two that allow us to test it to demonstrate that it actually works. So what we're interested in reality is this top portion, and it's always broken into 3 sections. The first, at the very top, we're declaring a private variable for use, and it's going to house that self-healing object variable for us. So that's our safe, that's what houses it long term, so we don't have to keep initializing it. Then we'll have a function. The function is what sets and gets the object variable for us. And the last subroutine is a simple one that just clears it from memory. And this is actually crucial that you use that last one when you close your form or close your database to release the object. I'm going to do a demonstration in a minute with, let's say, Excel or PowerPoint. It wouldn't make a difference. But if you use it and don't clear that variable, you'll end up with a hanging or a hidden running instance of the application in the background. So it's very crucial that you always use the clear subroutine at the end when you're completely done with the database or the form, whatever the case may be. Personally, I like to do it when the database closes. So I have a hidden form when my database is open that trigger all sorts of things. I log the user coming in and out of the database, and I check security and all sorts of other things. Well, part of that function within that form when it closes is I run these clear routines just to be on the safe side that everything has been released. The actual function for declaring and creating the self-healing variable for access is the simplest one. It's very simple. It just comes in, it takes a look. Do we have a value currently in our variable? If we don't, well, then that means we have to set it. We have to create that value. So then it will actually do the set process, and then it comes down here and it just pushes it out to our oCurrentDB. So it returns it in the function call. So if we take a look at a concrete, very simple example, as you can see here, I just want to get the name of the current database. Usually we do a currentDB.name, but we don't want to take that approach because if we do that every single time, it's going to have to do a currentDB initialization, right? Over and over and over. So we're instead going to use our self-healing variable, so the oCurrentDB instead. And you're going to also notice that in all my self-healing variables, I've always set up a line with a debug in the initialization block. And that's going to allow us to see when does it perform the set and when does it not. So you really can see, hey, we really are skipping that step. And that's where the gain is made. So if we take a look at the simplest of cases here and we just run it, you're going to see setting oCurrentDB and then we get our value. Perfect. Let's run it a second time. Oh, no setting this time. No setting, no setting, no setting, no setting. So that's where the performance gain comes. It only needed it to set itself the first time. You may do work in the database and say, well, I don't want to reuse the existing instance. Well, that's also when you can call the clear DB here. So you can just run it. And now, if we clear our immediate window, if we rerun this same command, because we've cleared the variable, now it's going to have to set itself again. So you can force the system to go and reset the current DB if that's what you need, just by calling this subroutine whenever you need. So yes, like I said, use it when you're closing your database or your form, but you can even use it within code if you have a reason to do so. Now, like I said, subsequent calls don't need to initialize it. That's beautiful. So then we move on to a second example just to illustrate a point here. Very simple. We're going to iterate through the tables and spit out the table names in this database. We all know in this case there's only one. Now watch what happens here. If I run this right now, what's going to happen? Is it going to set itself? It won't need to because it already set itself in the getName subroutine. So now you run a different procedure, but the benefit is still there. So now if we run it, and we can keep running it all we want. So it really is just the first call of any procedure that initializes the variable, and then the benefit is there for all the other procedures. So I hope you're starting to see the scope of the benefit of having a self-healing variable. And if we just go back for a second here to this guy, let's take, and let's go and rename it to improved approach. And what you'd end up doing with the coding normally is you'd be able to do this. Current DB. So by switching to self-healing, we're eliminating 1, 2, 3 lines of code in every procedure. So there's your benefit on coding. Not only do you get the benefit in performance, you also now are reducing your amount of coding. So I hope you start seeing a little bit here how this can be a positive in a database. Now, access is the simplest of all cases, and I'm going to now go through the other ones just in the order that they're listed. So let's go straight to FSO, and for anyone that isn't familiar with that abbreviation, it's the File System Object. And that allows us to work and interact with the file system. So directories, files, things like that, get file properties, date creation, attributes, all these other things. And you're going to see here the same setup as before. The top section is the self-healing part. The bottom will be just a procedure to prove that it's working. And you're going to see now that all the future examples, all the future self-healing object variable setups are slightly more complicated than the access one. And why is that? Well, you're always going to see the same thing with all of them. I have made them versatile. I've made them handle both early and late binding in one function. And I've done that to benefit everyone, the developer, so you can choose what you want. If we look here at the code, very simply, it always is the same setup. The very first line is a constant that declares, is this early binding or late binding? So FSO early bind equals false. So if it's not early bind, then it's late bind. And if it was true, then it would be early binding. And then that's why the next one, instead of just having one single declaration, we have 2. Because if it's early bind true, we're in early binding mode, then we declare it explicitly. If not, we declare it implicitly as an object. And the same is true for the function declaration itself, if it's early binding versus late binding. And then the rest of the code is always the same as we're familiar with. If the variable that holds our value up here is nothing, hasn't been initialized yet, well, then we go through the setting. And then one way or another, if it already had a value, it will pass it through. If not, it sets itself and passes it through. So that is the same. The clear function is always the same. It never changes. We're just clearing the variable to release the memory. And that's it in a nutshell. And to prove that this works, we can run this, and you'll see the first time it's going to set itself. We run it several times, and it never needs to set itself again. We come here, we clear the variable, and we run this again, and now you're going to see it's going to have to reset itself and keep going. And then don't forget, when you're all done, you clear it out completely. I wanted to illustrate something. When I talk about early and late binding, I'm always working here when I'm doing demonstrations here today. I'll always be in the late binding. I'm always going to have it set to the false up here, okay? But I want to illustrate why I also give you the early binding. If you're not familiar with the two, is early binding has the benefit, the major benefit, of giving you IntelliSense, which is huge when you're doing development. So we still want to keep that when we're doing our development work, but we want to switch it to late binding when we're deploying it to our users to avoid versioning issues. So let's switch into early binding. I want that IntelliSense. And then I'll always have at the top here, it tells you when you're in early binding, I need a reference to Microsoft scripting runtime. So we come here, we come down to Microsoft, and we just need to find the scripting runtime. Okay. And now I just want to show you exactly what that gives us. And what that gives us is when we type in our self-healing variable. Now when I go, I have my IntelliSense. So now I can do whatever I need, and I've got the full power of IntelliSense. In comparison, if we switch this now back to late binding, remove, in reality, this doesn't make a point. I've already switched it, but let's be explicit and clear everything. Now, if we try the exact same thing, you'll see the benefit of that early binding. I don't have IntelliSense anymore because I'm in late binding. So it's a crucial point, and that's why I made this, well, all of the functions that flexible, is then I could retain the IntelliSense when I'm working, but at a flip of a switch, I just change one variable to true or false, and I can switch between them with ease. So that's why, yes, the code is slightly more complex. I'll admit it. It has a couple extra lines at the end of the day, but the benefit is huge for us, for developers. Moving on, so we've done FSO, we've done Access. Let's move on to Excel. It's the exact same scenario setup. Nothing changes. At the top, I tell you if you're using early binding, what library you need. Here, the first one is always, do you want to use early or late binding? We declare our variable that's going to hold it in memory for us. Then we have our function that actually does the self-healing portion. If it hasn't already been initialized, it initializes itself. Otherwise, it just skips over, and then it passes itself back so we can use it. And we have a clear subroutine, right? Always the same thing. So let's put this to the test. Simple routine that's going to open Excel, add a blank workbook, make sure it's visible to us. And if we run it, Excel opens. It's beautiful. We close it. And you saw it set itself the first time. We run it again. It doesn't need to set itself. It's still in memory. And did you notice the difference in speed at which Excel opened? That's the benefit. And if we open the task manager for a second, you're going to see the why. Because it stays in memory. It's still there. Access is holding it. And it's remaining available for whatever it needs. So it doesn't need to reinitialize Excel. It's still there in memory to be used. That's why it's so much faster for every subsequent call. And if we do run this, we want to clear it for whatever reason. If you go back to your task manager, Excel is now gone because we released it. So now when I run this, yes, it's going to have to reset itself the first time. We close it. We call it again. It's going to be fast now. Okay? And then when we're all done, close the database, we clear it. Next is Outlook. Well, as I put in the module, I'm 99% sure that when I developed all this years ago, that it was possible to use self-healing variables on Outlook. And I'll also include in this conversation Word. But it no longer works. It generates an automation error, server unavailable error. So at the end of the day, you currently, from what I can find, cannot use self-healing variables on both Outlook and Word. I may keep plugging at it. I may figure something out one day. But currently it doesn't seem to work anymore. And I've tested in 2010, 2013, 2019. I'm pretty sure something's changed. I can't figure it out. I may. All right about it. I just chuck it up once again to being one of these great Microsoft-isms, things that you just can't explain. Why does it work in Excel, PowerPoint, but it doesn't work in Outlook and Word? Go figure. So now we're on to PowerPoint. Exact same setup. I tell you what library you need if you're using early binding. Here you control if you're using early or late binding for PowerPoint. We make our declarations here for our variable that houses it and holds it for us in memory. And then we make our declaration. If it already has a value, great, skips over. Otherwise, it will set itself automatically and it just passes itself back. Then we have our clear procedure. So let's take a look at that. Once again, very straightforward. I'm just starting a new presentation with a slide. That's it, making it visible. So let's run this. It sets the variable as you saw. It opens quickly, but still slow compared to when we rerun it the second time. And the third time. And it never needed to set itself again. It only set itself the first time. And if we look at our task manager, you'll see PowerPoint is being held in memory. The minute we clear it, Microsoft Access releases that instance. So, like I say, remember that clear is crucial. And then if we were to run this again, obviously we've cleared it, so it has to set itself again the first time. There's going to be a delay. But then after that, we're fast. And don't forget to clear. And Microsoft Script Control. A lot of people aren't familiar with this, but it can have some very good uses sometimes. Same setup. This is the library you need if you want early binding. This controls if you're doing early binding. You declare your variable. You go through the function, the clear subroutine. And then I have two test procedures down here. We'll just run this one. And it's a very simple get the value of an exponent expression. So you pass a number and the exponent you want to apply to it. So you want to square it, to cube it, etc., etc. And then I'm getting that value. Yes, obviously this is just an example. You can do this natively in Access and VBA. I just did a demonstration. And then I'm printing it back. So if we run this the first time, obviously it needs to set itself. Then we can just run subsequent calls and it doesn't need to set itself anymore. If we clear it and we run it again, then it needs to set itself again, obviously. So same thing, it's always the same thing. Once you understand the principle, as you can see, it's not hard to apply it to all sorts of different facets of your object calls. Word. Well, I've already touched upon it. It's the same as Outlook. Currently, doesn't seem like it's possible. So sadly, that's one where you're going to have to take the hit on initializing it every single time. I'll post back if I figure something out. RegEx. There's one I love. Such a powerful tool. But once again, same setup. I tell you what reference library you need if you want to use early binding. This is where you control if you're using early or late binding. Declare a variable, declare a function. If it's not set, we set it, and then it passes itself back, and we have a clear subroutine. So I have a very simple illustration to prove that it works, where this is a regex to split camel case. So if anyone isn't familiar with camel case, this is camel case where the first letter of every word is capitalized, but all subsequent letters are in lowercase. So what we're going to do is I want to make this now back into proper text. So I want spaces between the words. So before each capitalized letter, I want to have a space. And that's where the power of regular expressions, regex, comes in. And that's what this whole thing is going to do. And we're going to insert a space wherever it finds the pattern matching. So we just run it. The first time it's going to set itself. And as you can see, it outputs the split camel case with the proper spaces. We run it again. And there we go. It doesn't need to set itself. Once again, if we run the clear sub and then run our procedure again, then it has to reset itself the first time. And that's it. The shell, same setup, same scenario. Here's your early binding reference library if you want to use early binding. control early binding, declare our variable to hold in memory, declare our function to create the object, our self-healing object variable, and a clear subroutine. And here it is in practice. And if you run it, there's the amount of memory on this machine, and subsequent calls don't need to set that variable again. And if we clear it and rerun it, obviously then it needs to set itself the first time again. But you see, it's self-healing. I didn't have to do anything. My code automatically recognizes when it needs to reinitialize or not. And it only does so if required. And that's the whole reason, and that's where the name comes from, for self-healing. It knows, it recognizes when it needs to heal the variable or not. And the same is true for WMI. Here's the reference library for early binding. You control if you're using early binding or not. We declare our object variable that will hold it long term for us in memory. We have our function to generate and pass back the object, and we have a clear procedure. And here's an example. It's just going to list the different namespaces, and if we run it the first time, it has to initialize, but subsequent calls it does not. We clear it. Well then, yes, the next time we call it, it needs to initialize again. And that's all there is to it. And that's going to be for the WScript library. And you're going to see here there's actually two. I've split two different ones. So we have the WScript.Shell here, and below I have the WScript.Network. So that's why here in this section we have two variables, because I've got one for the shell and one for the network. Okay. They come, as you can see, from the same library. They're just different classes. So that's why they're in the same module together. I tell you which library you need if you want to use early binding. You control it. We declare our variables that we're going to use to hold it in memory. We have our first function here to get the self-healing object variable and a sub to clear it. And below we have the other self-healing variable and a sub to clear it. So if we look at the first one, we're going to use it to go get the environment variable string. So I want to get the computer name by going through WScript.Shell. So if we run it the first time, it needs to initialize, but after that it doesn't. If we clear it and then we run it again, yes, it has to initialize again, and then it's good. Now, if we come down here, I'm going to get the computer name once again, but this time we're going through the WScript.Network. The first time it runs, it has to initialize. There we go, it initialized, but all subsequent calls it does not. If we clear it and we run it again, then it has to reinitialize, and subsequent calls it does not. So that's it in a nutshell, guys. The critical aspect here is to understand the benefit that this can have for you and, well, ultimately your users. You're going to be improving performance for them. If you test this out, especially older computers, it can be drastic. Opening things like Excel, PowerPoint, it truly can have a significant impact on loopings. And if you're a developer that uses current database all over the place, you sprinkle it all over the place, this can be extremely beneficial to you as well. Yeah, and as you saw with the code, I've made it as flexible as possible by allowing both early and late binding, so you benefit there. There's no bitness requirement here, so we don't have to be concerned about 32-bit versus 64-bit. It just works. And just remember to clear your variable once you're all done with the database or the form, if you're really sure it's just limited to the form. But in my experience, really, upon closing the database, clear the variable, not before, or you're just risking it being cleared and then it needs to be reinitialized, and you're just better to have a hidden form. And when that form closes, because the database is closing, it just clears all those variables in one shot. I hope this has been informative. I hope this is something you guys haven't seen before. Please let me know what you think. leave me some comments. I'd love to know, especially about this one, if this is something you're familiar with, if you've seen it before, if you've seen it implemented differently, if you happen to know how it can be implemented with Word or Outlook, I'd love to hear that. So leave me some comments. If you don't mind, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as much as possible, if you're able to promote the channel at all, publishing on your blogs and networks, please do so. It goes a long way to help me continue to do these types of videos. And otherwise, have a great day, guys. We'll see you in the next video.